Rain lashed against the cracked windshield of my rusted 1998 Ford F-150, the wiper blades squealing a pathetic rhythm. I sat in the parking lot of the Oak Haven County Courthouse, staring at the damp, crumpled bills on my dashboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. $5. That was the entirety of my net worth. At 34 years old, I had been reduced to the price of a cheap cup of coffee. Just 6 months prior, I was running a successful boutique logistics company. Then came my business partner, Mason Cartwright. Mason had a smile that could sell ice to a blizzard and a soul as hollow as a drum. Over the course of a year, he systematically embezzled our operational funds, funneled them into offshore LLCs, and left me holding the bag when the creditors came knocking. The courts took my house, my savings, and my reputation. Mason, armed with a team of high-priced lawyers, vanished without a scratch. I was homeless, running on fumes, and desperate. That was the day I walked into the county tax deed auction. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of floor wax and stale despair. Auctioneer Thomas Caldwell, a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the 1990s, was rattling off properties. Most were bought up by local developers for tens of thousands. Then, a slide clicked onto the projector. Item 42, lot on the edge of the county line. Structural hazard. Condemned barn, Caldwell droned. Opening bid to clear the administrative ledger, $5. Silence filled the room. The local developers snickered. The property was a notorious eyesore on Old Mill Road, swallowed by blackberry brambles and rotting from the inside out. It was a liability, not an asset. $5? Caldwell asked, raising an eyebrow. Anyone? I just need to get this off the county's books. I didn't think. I just raised my hand. Caldwell looked at me, pity flashing in his eyes. Sold. To the man in the damp coat. Handing over my last 5 bills to the clerk was the most terrifying moment of my life. I had no money for food, no money for gas. But I had a piece of paper that said I owned a half-acre of dirt and a collapsing wooden skeleton. Driving up to Old Mill Road, the reality of my purchase set in. The barn leaned aggressively to the left, groaning in the wind. The roof was a patchwork of missing shingles and gaping holes. Inside, the smell of damp earth, rat droppings, and decades of neglect hit me like a physical punch. I spent my first night sleeping in the cab of my truck, wrapped in a moving blanket, listening to the rain tear through my new property. The next morning, I assessed the nightmare. The immediate threats were overwhelming. The foundation. The Fieldstone foundation was crumbling on the west side, causing the aggressive lean. The roof. At least 40% of the crossbeams were suffering from dry rot. The wildlife. A family of raccoons had claimed the hayloft, and they were not interested in negotiating. The elements. Winter was 6 weeks away in rural Pennsylvania. If I didn't stabilize the structure, the snowpack would collapse it completely. I had to survive. I started by scavenging. I found a diner in town, run by a stern but kind woman named Martha Higgins. I offered to wash dishes, mop floors, and take out the trash in exchange for their day-old food and a few dollars under the table. Martha, seeing the quiet desperation in my eyes, agreed. Every free hour I had, I spent at the barn, clearing debris by hand. It was back-breaking, solitary work. My hands blistered, bled, and calloused. But in the silence of that rotting wood, I began to find a strange sense of peace. There was no Mason here, no lawyers, just a problem that could be solved with sweat and time. 3 weeks into the clearing process, I was pulling up warped floorboards in the center stall to check the joists. My crowbar caught on something solid, not wood, metal. I cleared the dirt and hay away, revealing a heavy, rusted iron ring attached to a thick oak trapdoor. My heart hammered against my ribs. It took me an hour of scraping away rusted hinges and using a lever system with a 2x4 to finally pry it open. A rush of cold, stale air blew up from the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down a set of narrow stone stairs. I expected an old root cellar. Instead, my flashlight beam cut through the darkness to reveal a massive, subterranean vault lined with brick. And it wasn't empty. Underneath thick canvas tarps covered in decades of dust sat a pristine, perfectly preserved piece of history. A 1927 Indian Scout motorcycle. Next to it were wooden crates stamped with dates from 1929, holding intact, sealed bottles of Prohibition-era whiskey. But the most stunning discovery was tucked in the corner, a massive stash of flawless, antique architectural salvage, leaded stained glass windows, ornate brass chandeliers, and hand-carved mahogany doors. Researching at the local library, I discovered the barn had once belonged to Iron Jack Murphy, a notorious regional bootlegger who used the barn as a front for a massive distribution hub before he mysteriously vanished in 1931. I didn't drink the whiskey. I didn't keep the bike. I needed capital. I quietly contacted a vintage motorcycle auction house in New York. The Indian Scout, untouched and entirely original, sparked a bidding war and sold for $62,000. I sold the whiskey to high-end collectors for another $18,000. Suddenly, the man with $5 had $80,000. I didn't buy a house. I didn't buy a new truck. I poured every single cent back into the barn. But I wasn't just going to fix it. I was going to transform it. I envisioned a space that honored the history I had unearthed, an artisanal hub, a community event space, and a stunning architectural showcase. I hired a local crew of independent contractors, guys who had been laid off when the town's paper mill closed. Together, we worked through the brutal winter. We jacked up the entire structure and poured a new, reinforced concrete foundation. We salvaged every piece of healthy timber and replaced the rot with massive steel beams, creating a stunning juxtaposition of 19th-century rustic wood and modern industrial steel. We installed floor-to-ceiling glass on the side facing the valley, letting natural light flood the space. I used the antique stained glass and brass chandeliers I found in the vault to decorate the interior, turning the cavernous space into a breathtaking cathedral of wood and light. The underground vault itself was cleaned, reinforced, and turned into a moody, intimate, speakeasy-style lounge. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The condemned hazard was becoming the most beautiful building in the county. Word travels fast in a small town, and unfortunately, it travels even faster to corporate vultures. By spring, the barn was 90% finished. I had already booked 3 weddings and a corporate retreat. That's when a black Mercedes SUV pulled up my newly graveled driveway. Out stepped Mason Cartwright. He looked exactly the same. Tailored suit, expensive watch, and that infuriatingly smug smile. He had caught wind of my sudden luck through the regional business grapevine and had done some digging. "Arthur," Mason said, looking up at the towering glass windows. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. You always were a hard worker. Not much of a visionary, but a hard worker." "Get off my property, Mason," I said, gripping my hammer so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Ah, about that," Mason smirked, pulling a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "You see, while you were playing carpenter, I was doing some reading. This property sits right over the proposed expansion line for the new interstate bypass. The county is going to be buying up this land through eminent domain in about 6 months to build a commercial rest plaza. My stomach dropped. "But it gets better," Mason continued. "You bought the tax deed, yes, but you failed to clear the secondary liens on the historical title, specifically an old commercial access easement owned by a defunct holding company, a company I just bought for pennies. I have the legal right to bulldoze an access road right through your new glass wall, Arthur. Unless, of course, you sell the property to me right now for a fraction of what it's worth. Save yourself the legal fees." He was trying to do it again. He was trying to take everything I had built with my own blood and sweat. I was panicked. I went to the town hall and the clerk confirmed it. Mason had greased the wheels with Councilman Richard Blake, a man known for taking corporate kickbacks. They were going to use the obscure easement to force me into a crippling legal battle I couldn't afford to fight, eventually starving me out and seizing the land for the bypass plaza. I sat in Martha's diner, my head in my hands, feeling the familiar weight of defeat crushing me. Martha walked over, slammed a cup of black coffee on the table, and sat down. "You look like you're attending your own funeral, Arthur. Talk." I explained everything. The easement, the bypass. Mason? Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "Mason Cartwright thinks he can come into Oakhaven and bully us? He doesn't know this town, and he certainly doesn't know Sheriff Miller." What happened next was a masterclass in small-town resilience. Martha rallied the locals. Sheriff Theodore Miller, a man who despised corporate corruption, began digging into Councilman Blake's sudden influx of campaign donations. Meanwhile, I went back to the library. I dug through the town's archives, property deeds, and historical registers. I remembered the odd brickwork in the subterranean vault. It wasn't just a bootlegger's den. I found a diary from 1858 belonging to the town's founder. The barn was originally built over a natural limestone cave. Before iron, Jack Murphy used it for whiskey, it had been a vital, documented station on the Underground Railroad. The vault was a sanctuary for escaped slaves heading north. The county zoning board meeting was a circus. Mason was there with his lawyers, presenting their plan to exercise the easement, bulldoze the barn, and pave the way for a strip mall and gas station. Councilman Blake was nodding along, ready to rubber stamp the destruction of my life's work. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't bring a lawyer. I brought Sheriff Miller, Martha, and a representative from the State Historical Society. I stood before the board. Mason Cartwright is right about one thing. This property is incredibly valuable, but not for a gas station. I presented the 1858 diary, the architectural assessments, and the verified documents from the Historical Society. I laid out the indisputable proof that the barn and its subterranean vault were a confirmed, pristine site of the Underground Railroad. The representative from the Historical Society stepped up to the microphone. "As of this morning, the state has granted the Old Mill Road Barn immediate emergency protection status as a Tier 1 heritage site. Federal law prohibits any structural alteration, demolition, or hostile easement enforcement on this property. The proposed bypass will have to be rerouted." The color drained from Mason's face. His lawyers immediately began whispering frantically to each other. Councilman Blake looked like he was going to be sick, especially when Sheriff Miller leaned over and whispered something in his ear about an upcoming investigation into his finances. Mason stood up, his veneer of charm completely shattered. He glared at me, his jaw clenched, before turning on his heel and storming out of the room. The room erupted into cheers. Martha hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Today, the Freedom Forge Event and Heritage Center is the beating heart of Oakhaven. Upstairs, the breathtaking glass and steel barn hosts weddings, artisan markets, and community gatherings, bringing vital tourism revenue into our once struggling town. Downstairs, the restored vault serves as a solemn, deeply moving historical museum dedicated to the brave souls who sought freedom along the Underground Railroad, alongside a small, tasteful exhibit about its Prohibition-era past. I live in a small, beautifully renovated loft attached to the back of the barn. I don't have millions in the bank, and I don't wear expensive suits. But when I wake up in the morning and look out through the massive glass windows at the valley below, I feel a wealth that Mason Cartwright will never understand. I started with $5 and a broken spirit. I learned that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to discover the solid foundation you need to rebuild your life. You just have to be willing to clear away the rot, face the cold, and dig deep enough to find it.